Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Lion King from 2019. When you watch these Disney live-action remake things, I'm always sitting there wondering, what's like the point or perspective of this? And in most cases, there isn't one other than it's in live action, which they never really do enough with that gives much of a perspective. And in this Lion King, even though it has some of the most earth-shatteringly, photorealistic special effects you've ever seen, like in the history of film and all that stuff, you can't believe it looks like they're real animals there. That's incredible. It's like you've never seen anything like that. But this movie uses all those things and makes them kind of horrible and empty and bullshit. It is a very cynical movie. To take an animated film that has style and theory behind it and is so beloved and go, but what if we made this live action? And you're like, but what's the reason for it? If you did it in another animation style, that would give some perspective. You could do it in a Looney Tunes style or an anime style, wink wink, or something like that, and that would be a comment, or you do something with that. And in this, it's like, yeah, but it's in live action, like it was like a nature documentary, like a Disney nature film or something. And it kind of doesn't really fully go towards that, because it doesn't really look like a nature film. It's not shot like Walking with Dinosaurs was shot like a wildlife documentary or something. It doesn't really do that, and it's trying to sort of do shot for shot, but if someone bumped the camera to when it wasn't as good of a frame or something, and you kind of wonder what exactly they're doing. A lot of me thinks it's literalism, which William Bibbiani mentioned in his review, and I think Lindsay Ellis has mentioned, and a lot of people mentions about these, is they're trying to sort of correct things and answer literal questions like, hey, when does Beauty and the Beast take place? Or what if we made sure the cast was actually appropriate for that setting and time period and didn't just cast a bunch of white people and things. There's certain things that's okay, that's cool, but what are you doing with that? It feels like often they're just doing it to kind of correct it, and so see, it's fixed now, and you're like, yeah, but it's not like you let them have any influence, or the director of this is Jon Favreau. It's not an African American director. He made a big point, but it's I think you're kind of took away a certain point of that by doing that. I don't think it knew what it was doing with the whole theory of it. Sort of doesn't really hold up very well, because the songs are kind of sacrificed. They lose the kind of big musical numberness of them. Be Prepared is pretty horrible. I Just Want to Be King doesn't have the Bubsley Berkeley element, or how it goes into funkier, weirder colors or something. You'd think they'd go into the surrealism. This was never going to be realistic. First off, animals, don't know if you knew this, don't talk. So the whole idea of making this look real is sort of silly. I mean, that doesn't really make any sense. You're just letting them emote less and all these things where you're just why did you do this? Or why don't you move the camera better, like a shot for shot remake? Because you're pretty much there, but then you don't do it. And then there's sometimes it doesn't understand the theory of The Lion King and how it would actually reflect pretty well in live action. Case in point, Circle of Life was actually edited and storyboarded like a live action film, and it kind of robs it of one of the more distinctive shots of that. Now, they do the things like racking the focus, which, it's not really live action, but then there's a part where Rafiki is putting Simba up for everybody, and how they did it in the original is kind of basically how they used to shoot explosions for a blockbuster in the 90s, because if they do a real explosion, they had to have 4 cameras running at once so they could get all the coverage. They have several cuts there, so it looks in theory, the film language, how a big action sequence would, so it shows a modern audience that this is important, this is a big deal, this is a selling point. And what was odd is they just didn't do that, and I was sort of confused, because I'm you want this to look real, even though it's animation. Why did you take that away? And it didn't seem to me they really understood the theory of the film they were remaking. They're just sort of doing it to do it. And I'm often saddened by this stage in Jon Favreau's career, because he's a director. Certain of his films I watch almost every year and really love, like Iron Man and Elf. I like Chef quite a bit. And then when we get to this, his special effects films don't have the soul and how good he can be with comedic actors. And you kind of get glimpses of that in this film, which is probably the best this film ever got. And between Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen as Timon and Pumbaa, you get a little of that with John Oliver, and you get that with Keegan-Michael Key and Eric Andre. And I really like those parts because they were funny. They were fun. Like, he basically let them improv and have fun with the movie, and it felt like he wasn't really good with the dramatic actors. In some places Chiwetel Ejiofor is pretty good, in other sections it's a really uneven performance, so it's not a good performance. James Earl Jones just kept reminding me that this movie sucked. The thing I don't get about the live action remakes is, like, don't remind me of a better movie like the entire time. It's very distracting to the quality of your film if I'm reminded that there's like this better thing that I could watch at home. That's weird. But just like, I sort of like the kid actors, but a lot of it, like Beyonce and her song, I was into when it was playing, but then it was over. I couldn't sing it in my head or anything, and it just feels so bland and boring. And it's literal in the sense of like, well, we need to show, Nala escaping, we need to show this section, we need to explain this a little more, and I'm like, well, but what are you doing with that? Or like, we need to make the hyena that Whoopi Goldberg played like more of, a villain and less funny. Where it's like, well, why? What? That's not the character. Like, why are you completely remaking some characters and changing others, and what's your like reason for doing that exactly? I don't mind like Nala having more screen time and stuff, but it just felt like Simba's hair becomes a whole sequence, which is like kind of okay, but I was like, well, why is this taking so much longer? There's no perspective to it. And I don't really hate remakes. Like, one thing that happened recently is like A Star Is Born. Like, we had various different versions for various different times, that's how you had your different Star Is Borns. And when I look at these remakes, it's like there's not like a different perspective on it, really. It's like you sort of act like there is, and maybe like Maleficent was maybe the only one who, which I didn't like that movie, but at least it tried, or Pete's Dragon did it the best. And then we get to The Lion King, and it's like the perspective is like, hey, it's in live action, and you're like, that's it. Like, it's not going to be shot in a different way, it's not really directed in a different way, there's not a new perspective on it, trying to be literal about certain things and how it's in live action, but it's kind of literal in that way of like a shitty person going like, well, this person would be dead now if this was reality. It's fine to say that as a side comment, but there are people who really believe that, and people who really believe that don't make movies or write stories or really creative in any way, because to kind of break away from that and to understand like, why are you using this technology? Like, you use this amazing photorealistic technology, but I would actually say Jon Favreau is not doing the role as a filmmaker of using it as a tool to tell his story. He's not using it as a tool to tell his story, he's just showing off. Like, there's no real perspective towards this. Why is this amazing technology used for this? Like, what are you trying to say with it? You're just trying to say, like, what if movie, but, look like photo, not cartoon? And you're like, why call to mind this other thing? Like, what's your perspective? Like, art isn't about what it's about, it's how it is about it. Like, that's a big thing of film criticism that Ebert talked about, and that's a good rule of art. It's the perspective of that art. It's not what it is about, it's how it is about it. Okay, so this film is in big capital letters what it is about, but how it is about it is not really concrete at all, because it doesn't understand how it is about it. It just thinks this surface, like, special effects level is its perspective, and that's not a perspective. That's just a stylistic choice. You have to have a perspective other than this movie but this thing, and I don't really understand what they're trying to say with this. Like, it just feels like they're correcting things and being like, see, establish the hyenas, this environmental thing, sort of. It's just, I feel like these reviews of these movies are just me complaining, because there's not much this film offers, and there's not much discussion it offers, even just thinking how cynical and creatively bankrupt this whole idea is, and it's from a studio that doesn't need it. That's the thing that bugs me the most about it. It's like, this eats up so much of our cultural space, but like, Disney doesn't need to make these. And at a time where revival houses and people are seeing more older movies in theaters, which is how they made tons of money, and by the way, Lion King did, I think, was it like this decade even, being re-released? And it's just altogether very sad, because I think Jon Favreau is being completely wasted on this stuff, and he's totally gone the way of almost like what happened with George Lucas, where they just kind of like go up their own ass with the special effects crap. They're not really a storyteller anymore. They're just kind of like, look at what I can do with a green screen or a blue screen, and it's like, okay, you've achieved this, but why are you doing it? Its answer is basically like, what if the Lion King, it was like real lions? I'm like, why would I want that? Like, that's stupid. Maybe make a nature documentary where someone's narrating it and he goes like, Simba's upset because Scar manipulated him. Like, that would actually be interesting. You couldn't have songs in it. I don't know how that would work, but that's like not my problem. This movie kind of lies flat in the fact that it's like, it wants to be very literal. It wants to kind of sell you on how, amazing it is that they did this, but I'm kind of like, well, what is so amazing about it? What are you telling? Like, the thrillingness of this is just sort of reminding me of something better, which is all of these films' problems. They just remind me of a better film. In this and Aladdin, they're just calling to mind things and like changing things and 2019ing them up and maybe giving the female characters a bigger role, but like not really doing anything or changing the perspective with it. Just going like, hey, women, they need more of a role. And you're like, so what? Like, yeah, but why'd you do that? And they're like, but there's women who see movies, so it's boring cinematically in biopics when you acknowledge every stupid thing because you're afraid someone on Twitter or there's going to be some article denouncing you for forgetting something. Like, there's reasons details were left out because it was a smoother, better story. Lion King might not be my favorite Disney movie, but I always got into it. And I could never really get into this because it was just like reminding me of getting into something else. I was nostalgic for something I watched earlier this week that was much better. It's not like Shakespeare. It's not like taking a perspective of something. Like with Shakespeare, when they do different adaptations, like take Baz Luhrmann. Okay, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. That's a different perspective on it. That's a 90s interpretation with guns that they say are their swords. Is it goofy? Is it silly? Yeah. But he takes a different version of it. That's how you adapt Shakespeare. There's different versions of it. You get it? Okay. So, and there's a perspective to it, and there's a reason they're doing it, and they're saying something with that different interpretation. What are we saying with this? Basically answer people who devalue animation, which is a whole affront to how, the whole Walt Disney Company was formed, so I don't really get that one. Or you're just trying to make a cash grab. Like, wouldn't it be cool if you took Lion King and really shot it completely differently and didn't have to acknowledge all these things? And Disney knows they can't free themselves from it. So if you can't free yourself from it, you're never going to have a good theory behind it. You're never going to twist it into something interesting and different. And the times this film was able to, through the comedic actors in this, through the sidekick characters pretty much, it was I had a lot of fun with those guys. But it just otherwise isn't. For a film or a sequel or a remake to be successful, it has to have a theory on why it exists. And this film just doesn't really have that at all. It doesn't have the fun to it. It just has a book report explanation on why it exists. And I kind of don't think we really need that. I find this just another upsetting, kind of boring movie. And it doesn't really add anything to film at all. What's really interesting is this is not really character based. We don't really meet Donald Glover as Simba or the kid as Simba as actors and as personalities. We see them reading lines from the original. And I don't know if I really needed that. I wanted their performance and their perspective on it. And that's what I got from Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen and Keegan-Michael Key and Eric Andre and a little bit John Oliver. And I didn't get that from a lot of these actors, which I got from Jeremy Irons and I got from that. And it's like I was really hungry for that perspective. And I think when I got it, it was probably just some sort of a release for some sort of an interpretation. And this wasn't one. This was an interpretation that kind of plays as a companion piece, but it's like a really crappy companion piece. And I'm hoping that they find new perspectives on these things, because having the same old perspective just done looking real isn't a perspective. It's sort of just like making the story work for people who aren't interested in animation and aren't interested in storytelling, frankly aren't interested in filmmaking. I'm not really interested in people and filmmaking and ideas that don't want to have fun with these ideas and go into them and use them and exploit them. And I think it's kind of like the cinema sins of movies, where it's totally, completely bankrupt of artistry. And we just kind of stare at it and wonder, Like, who does this help? Who is amused by this, and who is entertained by this, and what is this exactly doing to all of us? And I think it's maybe more dangerous and maybe more wasteful than it is an actual movie or piece of art, and that's pretty sad in the end. So if you have seen The Lion King and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.